Well, let me throw out my list.
All right.
And you guys, Manny Hill is in the house. You guys tell me what you think about this list, okay? And you could maybe you could split some hairs with who should be number 1 here for me, but here's how I rank them. Number 8, going up to number 1. Jarius Wright. I wouldn't have said that 2 years ago about Jarius Wright, but after watching what happened with the third wide receiver situation last year, a guy who can just catch a pass when you need it on 3rd and 7, underappreciated Jarius Wright. When he left, it was like, oh, yeah, whatever. Right. Like Jarius Wright's going to go sign with the Titans or whoever he signed with.
Right.
And now it's kind of like
we have finally found the positive of Laquan Treadwell. He makes you appreciate Jarius Wright. Right. That's a positive.
Yeah. So Jarius Wright is number 8 on the list. Number 7, Teddy Bridgewater. And I put him on this list of underappreciated Vikings because, and in part, I don't think people fully even underappreciate him properly. He was really good on 3rd down. He was really good in the 4th quarter / second half of games. And he was a quarterback that was beloved by not only the fans, but people in the locker room. Look how many players are flocking to the Saints right now, like former Vikings. And
the Teddy Exodus.
So I think having a guy in that position that people gravitate toward in the locker room and the coaches rave about, a guy who's a born leader, it's if you don't already sort of long for that, I think at some point when he becomes a starter and stays healthy, it's going to be even worse. So Teddy Bridgewater.
All right.
Number 7. Matt Burke is number 6 on my list.
Really?
On the underappreciated Vikings list.
Okay, why?
I say that because he was a franchise center for more than a decade with the Vikings, or it was about 10 years, I guess. Right. He helped quarterbacks get better. I think a great center can help quarterbacks get better. And when he left, I just remember when he left, it was like, oh, like Vikings always have. It's next guy up. Just find another undrafted guy, or John Sullivan. And John Sullivan was good for a while, but I think we've maybe gotten to the point where we don't properly appreciate a 10-year leader and Pro Bowler in a position like that, especially with the current state of the offensive line.
O-line, to me, is very difficult because often a lot of those guys aren't appreciated properly because you just like, if they're good, you just take them for granted. And then if they're not good, you're like, oh, you got to replace them all. They're terrible. So on my list, I actually stayed away from that position group just because to me, it's hard to quantify who's appreciated unless the guy is like a Hall of Fame slam dunk type player.
Sure.
And who's not appreciated.
So I almost put Steve Hutchinson on the list, but he's fairly properly appreciated,
yeah,
right?
I agree with that.
Okay. All right, you're going to hate this one. It's a non.
Burke surprised me a little bit, but keep going.
Well, the next one's a non-player. Number 5. It's Brad Childress. I put on my list of underappreciated Vikings.
Well, it's 12:04, and your time on this show is already an abject failure. So can we bring Rami back? Can we get Rami on the phone? Where's Collar?
Getting his taxes done.
Which
You're
I
stuck
need to get
with
done
me
too,
right now.
Which I need to get done too, by the way. I'm pushing the tax thing. I'm not comfortable with this.
So, all right, you and I have had this out before, but
I feel like you did this partially to troll me.
A little bit. Brad Childress, in his 5 years as Vikings head coach, 4.5, 2 division titles, an NFC championship game, and even with the disastrous 2010, in which I think they were 3-7 when he got fired, still finished with a 39-35 record as head coach of the Vikings. So he was an above 500 coach, and if you were to just forget about that last year, which is the reason why he got fired, you can't, his record would be closer to 10 games above 500. So he's above 500, NFC championship game, 2 division titles. I'm not saying he's Bud Grant. I'm saying he's underappreciated, thus he's on my list.
Even he's surprised. Even Chili's surprised by that selection. He's going to have a vodka the size of my head after that.
All right, number 4 on the list, underappreciated Vikings.
Yes.
Hat tip, Marcus Sherrills. This is a guy who played the better part of a decade in purple, was a starting running back, a backup running back, a pass catcher, a third down blocker. You put him on special teams, he returned kicks. Mo Williams.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. I didn't
put him on, but that's a good one.
A safety blanket who can play in multiple phases, a guy that you can just put out there and you don't have to worry about him. He's going to show up to camp, etc. Mo Williams on the list. Number 3 is Jim Kleinsasser, the winner of our Grittiest Minnesota Athlete bracket a few weeks ago.
Yep.
Again, 13 years. He was just always around. He was always in camp.
He was good.
He was
like, he did
solid.
A lot of really solid things, a lot of good things. So.
But playing 13 years is a rarity in the NFL. And I think he caught passes, he blocked, but I think the fact that you couldn't really quantify his value as much, like he was a road grader. If a run was sprung free for 50 yards, he would never really get the credit unless offensive lineman color commentator would go and like, well, watch this block by Jimmy Kleinsasser.
John Madden, yep.
So Jim Kleinsasser, underappreciated.
Yep.
Number 2, Ryan Longwell.
My guy.
Appreciation has grown over the past few years as kickers have come through here and failed. So Ryan Longwell, in only 6 years with the Vikings, missed only 5 kicks under 40 yards. That's pretty amazing. So maybe one time a year he'd shank a 38-yarder or something, and never did he miss a kick with the Vikings under 30 yards, from what I saw. He might have missed one extra point in there. And obviously, if you could get someone who is as consistent as he is with this team right now,
that's why they paid him back then.
Yeah,
because they finally said we are sick and tired of guys that aren't consistent. So that one makes sense.
And the number 1 player on my most underappreciated Vikings list is a guy that has definitely received accolades, and he was maybe not the face of a Vikings defense, but I still don't think he was appreciated enough because he didn't rack up the sack stats and some of the other numbers. Kevin Williams. Where people recognize how good he was, but he was way better and way more effective than people even give credit to. So Kevin Williams.
Interesting, yeah, because internally he was absolutely loved and he was fantastic. So internally they knew exactly. But again, that's the interior of the defensive line is difficult because I think a lot of fans, if you're good there, are like, oh, of course he's good. Now, if you're an end and get sacks, that's a sexy stat, right? Yeah. But if you're pushing things in the middle of the line, people are like, well, of course, that's his job. And then you get someone who's bad or too thin, perhaps, and gets beat up, and you're like, oh, yeah, that guy's not very good.
So they have something on ProFootballReference.com called approximate value. I don't even know how they come up with this, but it's essentially a singular number that allows you to rank the greatest players in an era or in history. And according to whatever this measurement is, Kevin Williams is the 11th best Viking of all time, ahead of Randy Moss, ahead of Adrian Peterson, ahead of Matt Blair, Chuck Foreman, Wally Hildenberg.
Who are the top 10?
Carl Eller, Fran Tarkenton, Jim Marshall, Alan Page, Mick Tingelhoff, Randall McDaniel, Ron Yeri, Chris Carter, Paul Krause, John Randall, Kevin Williams.
Interesting.
And then Chris Dolman is right after him.
Okay.
So he's legitimately one of the greatest Vikings of all time. I'm not sure if he's talked about in the same light as you would talk about a Paul Krause, and maybe some of it's because some of those guys went to multiple Super Bowls.
Right.
But,
yeah, probably not.
Right. But that's my list.
All right.
Of underappreciated Vikings players.
That's a good one. Do you want mine next?
Why don't you? What time are we doing Eric Eager?
12:20. We got time for Judd's list and my list, I think.
And we're back.
Let's fire it back up.
This is a rough edition of Purple Daily right now.
Oh, we mean rough. We're going through
the rookie struggling with the music. Just kidding you. All right, here's my list. I've got 10. Number 10, the guy that told Adrian Peterson in Peterson's rookie season, "Don't worry, just follow me." He only spent 2 years here. Tony Richardson, fullback,
okay. All right.
But the consummate professional. Basically, he saw Peterson play, and he's like, "You are unbelievably talented, and you're not that bright. So wherever I go, you go."
And then Adrian Peterson discovered throughout that time period how much he hated playing with fullbacks.
And do you remember then who replaced? Do you remember who replaced our guy T. Rich when he went to the Jets because the Vikings wouldn't pay him because they decided that this guy would be
Thomas to pay?
Yes.
Oh God.
Yes, the man that stared holes to us at press conferences and said, "What's that question again?"
He was like coming off a major foot injury.
Yeah, in Mankato.
I remember standing next to you and Chip at a practice one time, and Thomas DePay had been missing time with a foot injury, and I think it was Chip that asked the question, like, "Hey, so how's your foot doing? What's going on with your foot?" And Thomas DePay goes, "What are you talking about?" Chip's like, "Oh, your foot injury. Coach said that you're."
And Chip covered him in college, so Chip knew him.
And Thomas tilted his head and he goes, "What foot injury?"
Yeah.
Just like, well, not playful, but just like stares a hole through the back.
And we're like, okay, we're going to go to lunch. We're going to go down the street.
Thanks for chiming in.
I went to high school with Thomas DePay.
Did you?
Oh, St. Paul Johnson. Yeah, his senior year was my freshman year.
Was Thomas ornery in high school?
No, he was.
I heard he was a nice guy, but this was really
weird.
weird.
Got along with him pretty good.
Okay,
as far as I remember.
Well, Phil and I were like, okay, well, we won't ask you any more questions.
Don't punch me, please.
You're a fullback. That's okay. It's not that important. Not worth our health. Number 9 on my list. a safety who actually passed away of Lou Gehrig's disease at the age of 42 in 2014. Orlando Thomas played for the Vikings from 95 to 2001. He played in 98 games and had 22 picks. And I don't think he was ever fully appreciated that he was an incredibly reliable, solid player.
I feel like there weren't a lot of ball hawkers on some of those Vikings defenses.
And Robert Griffith played by him and was really good too.
Yeah.
But Orlando Thomas did not get a lot of attention and was a very good player. Number 8 on my list, I go back-to-back special teams aces here. 2005 to 2010, he was a linebacker, but he didn't play the position much, but he was great on special teams. Heath Farwell.
Yeah.
Heath Farwell was not appreciated and brought a ton.
And it's hard now. There's not as many special teams aces anymore because there's just kickoffs aren't as prevalent or kickoff returns.
He's got the big running start and would demolish you.
Yeah.
Which you can't do now. Number 7 on my list. He was a wide receiver from 94 to 2000 and once played a game with a broken jaw. Special teams specialist Chris Walsh.
Okay.
Didn't catch many passes, but he was a kamikaze. Back to your point on when you could be a kamikaze.
You got to be a couple screws loose if you're just a kamikaze on kickoffs, right?
He played a game with a broken jaw. Think about that.
That's aggressive.
Think about playing football. When your job is basically to throw your body at people and get hurt, your jaw's broken, and you're like, screw it, I'll just play.
Was it against the Cardinals that he had that big hit? That cutback block and just crushed somebody he was blocking somebody on a pass.
But I mean, this
destroyed a guy.
This was back before the concussion tests were important. This is before we're like, I think people's brains shouldn't be scrambled.
It's like smelling salt. And am I holding my hand up in front of your face or not? Just pick a number 1 through 5.
Number 6 on my list, played for the Vikings, defensive tackle from 87 to 94, played by Johnny Randall. This man only made, and I forgot this, 2 Pro Bowls in 14 years. Hank Thomas.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. 1990, 100 in that season, 109 tackles and 8.5 sacks, and did not make the Pro Bowl.
Also, one of the great underrated Tecmo Super Bowl players of all time, too.
Really?
He could just sneak right in through the offensive line and sack the quarterback 10 times in a game.
Really good player. Number 5 on my list, since this list is in honor of his accomplishments, I put him halfway through, Marcus Sherrills. 8 years returning punts for this team. He lost 2 fumbles. Now, he fumbled 8 times, but he fell on the ball 6 times.
So he got lucky is what you're saying. I'm just kidding. I love Marcus Sherrills.
It's variance. Number 4 on my list, the first of the forgotten purple, or the second, I should say, of the forgotten purple people eaters, Doug Sutherland.
Wow.
Defensive tackle, 71 to 81. We always mention Eller, Page, and Marshall, right? Sutherland is not mentioned, nor. Now, number 3 is mentioned more, and this guy played defensive tackle for the Vikings from 65 to 74. He's mentioned more, but it's still not necessarily in the same breath. Gary Larson. So the guys that filled out, it's Eller, Page, Marshall, and then it was so Larson and Sutherland are 3 and 4 on my list. Number 2, this one's debatable, but he got mostly forgotten in 98, and I don't know if that's fair, provided his accomplishments for this team. Wide receiver, 91 to 99 in 2001, Jake Reed.
I had written down Jake Reed after my list, thinking Jake Reed should have been top 3. So you're 100% right.
Chris Carter and Jake Reed went over 1,000 yards receiving in 4 consecutive years from 94 to 97, and then Moss came. But Reed, as a Viking, 33 touchdowns, 6,433 receiving yards.
I mean, it's fair to say before Randy Moss came along, the Vikings had one of the best wide receiver duos in the NFL.
They did.
And Warren Moon had that season in which he threw for 30 touchdown passes or something ridiculous and 4,000 yards, and a lot of that 95. Was Jake Reed. Yeah, Jake Reed in 1996 had 1,300 yards receiving for the Vikings.
Exactly.
So that's a great one.
And number 1 on my list, I believe, Phil Mackey, you had at number 3 on your list, Jim Kleinsasser.
Okay.
It was and if I'm not mistaken on this, he was one of, if not the first tight end to switch to sort of that H-back role. I mean, this guy for 13 years did everything nobody wants to do necessarily and was successful. So Kleinsasser is my number 1. Manny Hill.
There it is.
All right, I'll go through this pretty quickly. Number 10, Phil had him on his list, Jarius Wright. Number 9, I actually put Robert Griffith on the list because Robert Griffith was really, really good in the late 90s, and I think he made one Pro Bowl in like 2000. I think, but he was like multi-time All-Pro, like first team All-Pro, but like only made one Pro Bowl, which is, which tells you how much. Number 8, David Palmer, punt returner.
Sneaky. I like this one.
Yeah, punt returner, really good guy, really good. NFL 95 from Sega Sports, the video game. Yeah. David Palmer was lethal.
He was
lethal.
Put him in today's game, and he would be a superstar.
Yeah. You would sub in David Palmer as your starting running back because he was so good.
Yep.
You'd like take Robert Smith or is it Terry Allen? Maybe
Terry Allen.
Yeah.
Love it.
All right, number 7, Jerick McKinnon.
Yeah,
and I think he's so underappreciated that I think if he came back to the Vikings now, he would be welcome back with more than warm arms. I mean, he was.
And we were about to see him unleashed if he hadn't torn up his knee last year, right? He was going to be unleashed with San Francisco and maybe catch 70 passes or whatever his top end is. And now is it him and Tevin Coleman now? Did the Niners sign Tevin Coleman?
They've got 3 guys, and the rumor when they signed Tevin Coleman was that they were going to cut McKinnon, but I don't think that's been done yet.
Maybe the Vikings.
But they have 3 backs now.
Okay.
Number 6, I had Jake Reed on the list. Number 5, I had Ryan Longwell.
Yeah.
Number 4, B-Rob, Brian Robinson.
Okay.
B-Rob was really good for a long time, so definitely appreciate him. Number 2 is I had to play some sound for this because it's too good.
A handoff to Horde. That can take a little steam out of an offensive unit. As Leroy Horde down the sideline is going to get into the end zone, and what a run by Leroy Horde. That's 2 weeks in a row he's done almost the same thing.
Yeah, he's going to have to take that quote back. It says if you need 1 yard, I'll get you 3. If you need 5, I'll get you 3. But he's been doing a heck of a lot more than that.
You need 3, you need 5, I'll get you 50.
Yep, Leroy Horde. And then number 2 on my list, David Dixon, right guard for a number of years. And a lot of big names on that offensive line in the 90s for the Vikings. You had Todd Stussy and Randall McDaniel, Hall of Famer, Jeff Christie and everything, and the late Corey Stringer. But David Dixon was pretty good, too, in that right guard spot. And number 1 on my list, Chester Taylor.
Wow.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
1,200-yard back in his first season here, and then Adrian came in. But Chester was still really reliable as like a third down pass catching back when Adrian wasn't reliable to hang on to the football in many instances.